11, what was it like starting from the very beginning, waking up in the morning?
Wow. So September 11th, I was teaching in Washington Heights in New York City. And it was about my third year teaching. And the day started off like any other day. It was beautiful outside. I do remember that. I was living in Brooklyn at the time. So in order to get to work, I would have to take the subway from Brooklyn all the way up through Manhattan, through Harlem, and up to Washington Heights. And every day that I would get on the train, there was always a group of people that would be on there at the same time as I. And they were dressed in business suits, briefcases and everything, and they would get off right as we went into Manhattan. And they would get off and they would go to work, in the downtown area of Manhattan. So it was just, it was normal, like regular day. Um, got uptown, started teaching, and I just remember as I was in the classroom doing my thing, over the loudspeaker, the principal said, "Good morning. It is a beautiful day outside. Teachers, please be sure to turn off all electronics and close all the windows." Which was, it was kind of weird, it just all and all the kids looked at me, and all my students were first and second generation immigrants from the Dominican Republic. And so a lot of them, they said, "K?" They were just K, like what? Like what's going on? And so I just kept doing my thing. And then all of a sudden there was a teacher. He was running up and down the hallway and he was saying, "They're bombing us, they're bombing us." And I really didn't know what it meant. Like at the time, I thought it had something to do with the gangs because we were in a really a gang infested neighborhood. And I thought he was saying that the gangs were coming into schools, which they had done before. And then some of the teachers would have to go out into the hallways and actually fight them off. But soon after that, the principal asked us to move into certain locations, and I was a seventh grade ELA teacher, and we went into the gym. And as we were sitting in there, like as teachers, we were looking around at each other, and we really didn't have an idea of what was happening. Then I got a phone call, and I asked another teacher to kind of watch my kids as I stepped outside. I went outside to take the phone call, and it was my wife, who at the time was pregnant. Well, not pregnant. She had recently had my son, and she was at home in Brooklyn, and she started telling me what was happening, kind of like right across the water from where we lived. And then all of a sudden, the phone cut off. And in retrospect, what I realized at that time is that was when the tower with the antenna had fallen, and like everyone in New York lost cell service. So I, went back up to my student, back up to our gym where the students were, and at this time, parents are coming into the school and grabbing their kids and running out. Like there was no sign out, there was no like security and anything. Like they were just coming and getting their kids and leaving. And at this point, we started to kind of understand what's going on, but we just really didn't know how to react. And eventually, the numbers of the kids dwindled because this was a neighborhood school. Like, this is in New York City, so there were no like school buses. Kids lived in the neighborhood or they maybe took the train. But eventually there were still kids left in there. And as teachers, we all decided, we weren't going to go home to our families until all of these kids were taken care of. They were, they just had somebody there for them, or we took them home. And so that's what we did. We separated them, and we took different groups and we walked them home. And every kid, before we dropped them off, they would want to hug and they would say, "Are my parents okay?" And we told, I told them that they were fine, not knowing what the situation was. Again, in retrospect, a lot of those kids, their parents had gone downtown early in the morning because a lot of them worked like janitors and worked at different jobs like that. And some of them, and they had family members that had worked in the Twin Towers. and they had lost their lives that day. At the time, I didn't know it. Um, so after, they were all dropped off, then it was time for me to get home. I had to get back to Brooklyn. And some of the teachers were from like the local area, and they asked me to stay, and they said, because there were no subways. So there was no way for me to really get home with public transportation. Um, so I told them, no, I have to get back to my family. So I started walking, and I ended up walking from Washington Heights all the way down Manhattan. And when I used to tell this story to my students every year, I would tell them how there were just different phases of people that I ran into during my walk downtown. There were the people that had watched um, all the events of that day transpire on the television. Then there was the group of people when I got closer downtown who had seen it on TV, came outside, and then watched like the second plane hit the tower. And then as I got all the way downtown, there were people who actually saw everything that happened. Um, and so, and this is hours. It took me hours to walk all the way back home. And finally, when I did get downtown in the World Trade Center area, I was by my college. I went to Pace University in New York City, and the school was just blocks away from the World Trade Center. I ran into former teammates of mine. I played college basketball there. I ran into a former teammate who was still working at the university, and he described to me, what he saw. Like he was able to see both of the towers fall. And before that, he had described to me how, things were, coming out of the buildings as they were watching the fire. But later he realized, those were people jumping, like people were, taking their own lives. And then he said how, when the buildings fell, like people were running across the Brooklyn Bridge, running for their lives because they didn't know, running away from the smoke. And he said the crazy thing was every time, after like the first one fell and the smoke kind of subsided, people came back. Like a lot of people came back and my point when I was talking to my students is the human spirit really tells you to help. Yeah, initially you want to survive, but then there's something about the human spirit that always brings you back and always wants to make you help. And that's what really happened in New York that day. But later I have found out that I actually lost people that I know that day. The most important was one of my former teammates. He had perished, in the events. And I always felt after that it was important that I share my story with the students. And when I talk about it, I never talk about the political things. I just talk about how brave people were to go back into the building when there was a fire up in the sky. They wanted to put out a fire, and then they lost their lives. And I talk about how, the people that jumped, were not cowardly. They were actually brave because they decided that they were going to control their destiny and they weren't going to let other people control it. And I talked to them about, the importance of being respectful, to firefighters and police officers. And I know everyone has their own opinions about police officers, this and that, but on that day, so many of them risked their lives for people that they didn't even know. And so, several days after that happened, we actually went back to school. New York City went back to school. And I thought, I got on the train and I was going back uptown. And then I noticed that all those people that I was riding the subway with before, they weren't there. So a lot of them, had lost their lives just doing what I did that day, just going to work. And then, as I'm riding uptown, I'm thinking that, there's going to be a lot of kids that are not going to be in school, but they all were there. Like they all were there because they knew they were going to get fed. They knew that there were going to be people there that cared about them. They knew that they were going to be taken care of. And that day, we weren't, well, that year, I should say, we were no longer teachers. Like we were all counselors, we were big brothers, big sisters, we were surrogate parents, we were social workers, like we were everything but teachers. Like the end of grade tests didn't really mean as much that year. Um, so yeah, it was quite a day. Like it definitely changed my life. Not too many years after that, I decided to leave New York, leave Manhattan, and move to Charlotte, North Carolina. I just kind of had enough. I love New York. I go back and visit all the time. I don't think I want to live there anymore. Um, but yeah, it was a crazy day.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I really appreciate it. And so like as you were just talking about going back to school a few days after 9/11, what were what was the atmosphere like in the school? What were like the students talking about? What was that like?
It was, it was somber. As faculty members, um, we just wanted to let them know that we were there for them. But there were kids that had lost aunts and uncles, and there were some kids there who had lost parents. And one of the big things, the kids talked to us a lot about like the last interaction that they had with the family members that had passed away. And they talked about how, they had argued over such like insignificant, stupid things, and how they regretted the last conversations that they had. And we allowed them to say how they felt. And, this is in Washington Heights. Like a lot of these kids were, like I said, first and second generation immigrants, like very, it was a poor neighborhood. So it wasn't always easy for them to express their feelings, but we gave them that platform and gave them that opportunity to do so. And, homework just didn't seem important anymore. And, some of the things that, I guess you could say, take for granted, just went by the wayside as we just really cared about taking care of each other emotionally.
Yeah, for sure. And on that day on 9/11, what was it like finally getting back to your wife and your family?
It was a long, long walk, and I finally made it back. And all we did was we sat and we watched TV for like 30 straight hours. Like we just sat and just watched because I hadn't seen what happened. I saw the aftermath. Like when I walked across the Brooklyn Bridge to eventually get home, I just looked back and it looked like a war zone. Like the downtown Manhattan where I had gone to college, and the area that I knew like the back of my hand didn't look. It looked unfamiliar to me. I went to the place called the Brooklyn Promenade where you can kind of look at the New York City skyline, and I didn't recognize it anymore because those towers were gone. And so all I did was like we just sat and we just watched all the news coverage and just couldn't believe it. Like it felt like America had gotten punched in the face. Like we used to be the big tough guys, and our country had gotten punched in the nose. And eventually, we did recover, but not really, because nothing has been the same since then. Air travel changed forever. I think we were humbled as a country. We were humbled, but I was happy to see that New York City, like people came together. Like I had never seen people come together like that before. Just all different races, and there was really no prejudice. There was no prejudice in the days after 9/11. Like people just really came together.
Yeah, for sure. And one last question, before I let you go, I know you're busy. Um, is when you tell your students nowadays, about 9/11 and about everything you witnessed, what's the significance of you doing that, and what are typically like your students' reactions?
Well, really, they have no idea. They have no idea about it. Like some of them have like a family member who had told them like their experiences on that day, but really they don't know the emotional side of it. And there's a couple of videos whenever I do my presentation, there's a couple of videos that I show them, um, where it helps them really understand the impact and the significance of the things that happened on that day, and they are really surprised. A lot of them break down, and they're crying, but I think a lot of them they're probably crying for other reasons. Like it makes them think about people that they may have lost in their lives. And one of one of my points of emphasis is just about appreciating the adults in your life that really love you. And don't be afraid to say I love you to them and stuff like that. And that really gets to a lot of the kids. And it might be the first time, especially for I usually speak to seventh graders. It's the first time that they have been uh put into a position to get emotional like that in school, because this is somebody who they know that this has happened to them firsthand. And I show them a lot of, like, I show them pictures of my teammate, and I just kind of give them the whole story of my experience. And it really impacts them. As you saw with Ashley, she still talks about it. A lot of my former students still reach out to me on 9/11 every year. And my main thing that I say is, and it's the 9/11 quote, never forget. And they reach out to me and tell me that they've never forgotten the story.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story with me, David. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.